Good Friday morning. Welcome to the beginning of the Word. Today we'll be looking at Philippians chapter 4, verses 2 and 3. I implore Euodia and I implore Syntyche to be of the same mind as the Lord. And I urge you also, true companion, help these women who labored with me in the gospel with Clement also, and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. Here, Paul turns from the general outside concerns that he's dealt with in chapter 3 to the specific pastoral needs in the congregation. He'll deal with this in chapter 4, verses 2 through about verse number 9, arguably, and then we'll transition to the support of ministry and how we should conceptualize support of work in the Lord. But for now, he's going to address the sorts of things that need to happen in this disagreement between two sisters. He says, I implore both of you, I implore Euodia and I implore Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. And so there's some disagreement that's going on with them. We saw in our last study Paul's care for the church with the language he used them. And this whole letter is full of just fervent Christ-centered love for the church. And I would say it's one of Paul's most affectionate and peaceful and caring letters. And now that affection and relational capital gets zoned in on two sisters in particular, Euodia and Syntyche. And Paul pleads with them. He implores them to agree in the Lord. They need to get on the same page. So he's imploring them, but then notice also what he's doing. He uses the word urge. He urges also you, this true companion. Now, we don't know who the true companion is. Could be someone there at Philippi. People speculated it could be Epaphroditus, as that makes sense. But regardless, he's calling on someone there that people recognize, someone who's leading, someone who's working in the Lord to help these women who labored with me in the gospel. Notice as Paul conceptualizes this request, the fervency and the intensity and the emphaticness of these words of imploring and urging. They're not passive words like ask or request or suggest. Paul's turning this same intensity that he implores these sisters to agree with to urge this true companion. He's making big asks across the table that people can be united. He's calling on this person with it seems to say, as we mentioned, all the relational capital that he's built and we've seen throughout this, to ask them to help them get along. Sometimes we need people to help us step in and agree. Sometimes we need someone else to give us perspective, to adjudicate the ideas, give us other ideas, and help us both see where we're wrong because we can't hear it from each other. And about this, we need to realize that this is so valuable, to have people who can help, and therefore there need to be of the same mind of the Lord. As we think about many of the things that have gone on in the book of Philippians, about the need to labor together and to work together, and the humility we need to have, and the importance of working, and the importance of living worthy of the gospel, there's a thought that many of those things may be about addressing this situation. Obviously, there's the advancement of the gospel. It makes a lot of sense to read this as a thank you letter for the gifts, but also it seems that one of the pressing situations that caused the letter was this situation. And so many of those things that apply to the disagreements that we may have and the difficulty we may have in pressing forward into Christ and the love and the right attitude kind of all goes together in this. And I do want to say, before we get on to think a little bit more about this, is these sisters had labored with Paul in the gospel. Notice they labored with me in the gospel. They were involved in that. They were in the trenches with him and working together. It seems that he relies on them quite seriously. And about this, we want to note that these sisters were essential to the gospel labor. In various places, there's times that sisters' work is discounted, and we need to make sure that we do that in a way that honors God and honors God's structure and God's order and God's commands. But if we dismiss that and say that it's got to be men involved in the work of the gospel, we're not being biblical, because this text is very clear, and it seems to be that Paul really wants to get them back to agreeing so they can get back to this work. Further, the fact that they had been companions, but now they're at odds, tells us this can happen as well. It's the second thing we can learn. And so we need to make sure we invest in relationships and not allow relationships to just sort of deteriorate. We can't allow previous fellowship and success to allow us to grow lazy in our relationships with one another, because they had what appears to be success and care and laboring with Paul, but now that relationship is deteriorated. And so we need to continue to invest in that. And Paul then continues to name drop, calling on Clement also, and then the rest of these fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. And I want to notice that, whose names are in the book of life. Paul recognizes that all the people here, Euodia, Syntyche, this true companion, Clement, and the rest of these fellow workers, their names are in the book of life. And we need to keep that in view, that everyone who's a Christian belongs to God and is on the citizenry of heaven. And that needs to be a fundamental perspective that we have about each other. And perhaps for these sisters, that's the place they need to start so that they can agree in the Lord, by recognizing what they have in common in the Lord. And so as we have dust-ups and struggles and difficulty, we can't allow ourselves to see each other's in our congregations and the things we're working of, sometimes with ministry concerns that are real and legitimate and serious and difficult and taxing and of serious consequences. We've got to remember that we're in the book of life together, and that we've put into this. And so we've got to approach each other as someone else who God has claimed as their own, and God has made righteous, and God has put into Christ. That's the posture and the mindset that we approach each other with. And there may be all the other technicalities got to get worked out with, but we can never allow ourselves to see each other as the enemy, as someone who opposes us, but as someone who's a fellow Christian and someone who we have the work to get along with to advance the gospel for the glory of Christ. Thank you so much for joining us today here at Begin in the Word. It's our prayer that just you begun today in the Word of God, you live out today in the Word of God.